Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's Select Science Clinical webinar. My name is Frankie McDonald, and I'll be moderating today's presentation entitled Improving the Quality and Management of Your Point-of-Care Testing Environment. Our speaker today is Cameron Martin, Point-of-Care Coordinator for Queensland Health. In this webinar, he will present an overview of how one of the world's largest point-of-care testing networks achieved seamless integration through point-of-care informatics. He will discuss how to develop a point-of-care testing network that is scalable and cost-effective whilst conforming to ISO guidelines. Cameron will be answering your questions in our live Q&A session at the end of his presentation, but please feel free to ask any questions at any time during the webinar by clicking on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. You can view the presentation in full screen by clicking on the tab at the bottom right of the media window player. And for those keen to accrue their CPD points, you'll be automatically redirected to the relevant links at the end of the event. The on-demand link will also be provided a few days after the webinar. So, just before I hand over to our speaker for today, we're going to ask you guys a quick poll question, which you should see appearing on your screen right about now. So the poll question is, what is your biggest challenge in managing your point-of-care testing environment? Option A is managing your point-of-care device operator's competency. Option B, complete visibility and control of point-of-care devices. Option C, capturing patient results electronically and proper reimbursement. And option D, maintaining a high level of quality assurance, e.g. quality control, proficiency and maintenance. So that's what is your biggest challenge in managing your point-of-care testing environment. If you could select the answer that is most relevant to you, that'd be fantastic. Okay, so without further delay, I'd like to hand you over to Cameron. I hope you enjoy the presentation today.
Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me on this session. Tonight I'll be talking about improving the quality management of point-of-care systems using point-of-care informatics. The first slide is just very simply a screenshot from Wikipedia, where someone I thought had written a very nice description of ISO 15189. For those looking on small screens, I'll just read out the two paragraphs in red, which I think are particularly relevant and quite nicely illustrate some of the aspects we'll be talking about later on. And that is that the working group included provision for the laboratory service to advise about the collection of patient samples, interpretation of test results, turnaround times, testing in a medical emergency, and the education and training of healthcare staff. And the second paragraph talks specifically about the use of specialised software to aid in achieving ISO-based accreditation in laboratories. And these are 2 points I think are nicely illustrated here, and we will be discussing them later. Okay, on our next slide, if you're managing your laboratory by ISO, we use 15189 in Australia for both point-of-care and laboratory testing. So any accreditation agency looking at your laboratory is going to expect that your new methods are validated against an existing or a reference method, that any new instruments verified to the manufacturer's specification, and any procedures and methods are documented and reviewed. This is all common sense and good practice, and every laboratory does it. Also, a suitable training program needs to exist, and all your operators should have completed it before they use any equipment or perform any procedures. Also good practice. However, now I'm starting to put things in red because these things get progressively harder to do when you're working with point of care. And that is that appropriate quality controls performed, reviewed and documented. Appropriate quality assurance is performed, reviewed and documented. And for those of you not familiar with the term, in Australia, what you would call, my American colleagues, proficiency testing is called quality assurance, but it's the same thing. It's external quality control. Furthermore, there should be a documented management system for your network or your instruments, that you should be monitoring the system as a whole and reviewing and testing and documenting this monitoring, that any errors and problems and issues are duly investigated, and any solutions and corrective actions from these investigations are also documented and communicated to the users. That's the reason for doing investigations. So what it comes down to is that when you're trying to accredit a service to a standard, in the case of a laboratory, The lab's in control of the lab, which makes it fairly easy. Your QC and QA are easy to perform and record. The instruments are right there in front of you. Any excursions are followed up and documented. Your operators are all trained because this is what you do. Procedures are documented and followed because this is also what you do. Your instruments are maintained because you need to provide a reliable service, and records of all of this are kept. What this means is that you've got a system that's easy to monitor, and you have a system that's easy to troubleshoot if any adverse events arise. Now we move to point of care. It all becomes a little bit harder. Unfortunately, the lab isn't always in control of the point of care lab. The instruments are often out of sight. Many of the operators would like to think they're also out of sight. Quality control may not be performed, or if it is, the results may not be properly followed up. Untrained operators can perform tests at times. Documented procedures are not always followed. Undocumented procedural modifications, also known colloquially as shortcuts, can be made. Maintenance may not be performed on schedule, or sadly perhaps not even at all. And records are not always kept. So you end up with a system that's much less easy to monitor and much harder to troubleshoot if you need to find the root cause of an issue. Okay, so what do you do? Well, there's a couple of standout areas that probably capture 80% of what you want to do. So with point of care testing, particularly when you're talking about applying a standard, in cartridge-based systems, the manufacturer has their principal technology investment in the cartridge system. So your quality control and your quality assurance needs to target the cartridges because that's where the testing is actually being done. The analyzer is often just a sophisticated volt or amp meter which interprets the signal from the cartridges. And QC and QA take on slightly different meanings in cartridge-based point of care to what they do in the lab. In the lab, QC tells you how your instrument performed on the day that you did the testing. And QA tells you how your instrument performed compared to other people using the same instrument and the same reagents as a group. In point of care, your quality control tells you what the fitness of your particular lot of cartridges is. In other words, are they suitable to use? And your quality assurance tells you how your particular cartridge performed compared to multiple cartridge lots on the same analyzer. Slightly different meanings, but still useful information. In point of care, the other biggest sources of error are pre and post analytical errors, and these are the operator really, and this is a training issue to manage. You manage these 2 points and you've automatically managed 80% of your system, but the problem is how do you do that? So to summarize, you've got to manage your analyzers / your cartridges, and you've got to manage your operators to keep your point of care system in control. So when you're looking at on-site quality problem solutions, when you're managing your instruments and your cartridges, you've got to remember that everything that you currently do in the lab, you now have to do at a distance. And in the case of our network, that distance can be large. And another thing you need to keep in mind is the clinician's first responsibility is to diagnose and treat their patients. To them, point of care is just one of the means to that end. They're never going to lavish the same degree of love and care on the testing process as a laboratory person would. So your quality management programs must be structured with this in mind. So to maintain control from a distance and ensure that accessible records are kept, as against recorded on scraps of paper that will never be found again, the best, perhaps the only way, is to do this through a middleware and automation of your system. So here's where we talk a little bit about the role of the point of care coordinator as against the laboratory person who just happened to be saddled with looking after point of care. The point of care coordinator is basically a whole of system administrator. They're the ones that look at what quality control processes you use in the lab that you can pull out and modify and reuse at point of care. Not all of them will work. Some of them will work with a bit of rework, and some will work just as they are. But you have to make that decision, because what you want to do is provide correct and up-to-date testing information to your clinical units in a way that your clinicians will understand it. You also need that when you set up a new system, that it's done properly and everything's working as it should be before you hand it over, because if it's not working properly, then it never will afterwards. You also need to provide a program of ongoing support, training and monitoring that lets your users get the most out of their instruments but keeps them locked into a quality system, because you want them to continue producing high quality results, hopefully without them even realising that they're doing it. And at the end of the day, you have to manage all this in a manner that satisfies your regulatory authorities, who often don't quite understand point of care themselves. It's comprehensive, it's got to be cost effective, it's got to be supportable by the laboratory. It's no good having a system that the laboratory can't manage. It's got to be acceptable to your clinicians. If it's not acceptable, they won't do it. And of course, you must not unduly hinder patient care, because at the end of the day, that's why you're doing all of this. So it's just a simple job. So we'll talk a little bit about our network. In Queensland, all the public pathology is provided by one public pathology provider that covers the whole state. It's a fair slab of Australia, as you can see. The map on the left shows all our locations, and we run from the New South Wales and Northern Territory border all the way up to Papua New Guinea. And on the right, you can see a little bit there. The dot in the middle of Queensland was for a talk I did for Singapore, which showed the Singaporeans how big Singapore was compared to our network. So how do we do this? Well, we have 35 laboratories located throughout the state. I know it says 34 there, but one of them is the point of care laboratory, so it didn't get counted. They range all the way from Thursday Island, which is up at the bottom of Torres Strait, to all the way down at Warwick, which is almost on the New South Wales border, and out west. And these laboratories work in partnership with 16 hospital and health services. So you can see, if you recall the previous map, that we have more or less one, sometimes two laboratories in each hospital and health service. And although technically they are a separate service, they are allied in the common goal of providing healthcare to the people of Queensland. And just before we leave this slide, if you have a look at the blue Central Queensland area there, we'll flick into the next one. And you'll see my partner Vince standing outside Tara Health Services, which was up in the top left-hand corner of that little purpley blue square there on the map. So it's typical of the sort of outback service that we support. I don't know if you can read the slide on your the sign on your slide, but it says that this hospital runs outpatient departments 3 times a week. It's basically a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday hospital with emergency services afterwards. And behind Vince there's probably about 25 beds in total. So it's typical of the sort of outback health service that we would look after. And the nearest laboratory service to that hospital, which of course has no on-site laboratory, would be about 4 hours away. Okay, so a little bit more detail. In our network, we have about 350 iStat analyzers, about 27 HemeQ white cell count diffs, about 20 plus Siemens DCA A1C analyzers. We're rolling out a few Healthineer Affinians at the moment, mainly to do CRP. And soon, hopefully, we'll be putting some blood gas analyzers in our network as well, now that we've expanded our interface. So it's quite a large network. You can see that our iStat program began back in 2001. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that, not because I'm on Abbott's payroll, not at all. It's just simply because we've got accurate records that go back 19 years. So they show what I'm going to talk about very, very nicely. So this chart probably illustrates a very important point that I'll go into with some detail, and that is the red line, as you can see, looks at test numbers from 2000 on our iStat network. I should have redrawn this for 2019 because I think we'll probably hit the 450,000 line this year on the red. Likewise, the bluey line you can see has had its ups and downs over the years. Currently sits around about just under 5%. And that's our error rate. So you're going to look at that and wonder, what were we doing so terribly wrong a few years ago, and what magic did we do around about 2010? Well, I'll go into it now. Well, what were we doing wrong? Remember back there in the first part of the talk, I said how the laboratory isn't always in charge of the point-of-care laboratory? Well, we were presuming that we were. We were wrong. We were attempting to run those analyzers as though they were in a lab, and quite patently they weren't. And in many cases, not even near one. So what we did, we sat down, we looked at our system, and we changed it. We looked at every aspect of it and decided what we could change and what we couldn't change. So initially, all our training was done by our lab staff, who took regular visits out to some of these sites, and they also trained local accredited key operators who would train in their absence. Now, unfortunately, many of these sites are very remote. It might be months before our laboratory could get out and visit them a second or a third time, and the key operators had a key role to play in doing that training. Unfortunately, we found that the training quality was highly variable. You could say it was always good, very good, fairly good, not too good at all. But the problem was that it was variable because it was being delivered by different people, some clinicians, some laboratory staff. So that was something we tried to address. And we found other issues, that untrained clinical operators had access to our testing system, that our QC was not really readily traceable and often recorded in a way that made review very difficult, that our QC and QA issues were often not followed up properly, that repair of faulty analyzers was not well recorded or followed up, so people could be making the same mistake over and over again and breaking their analyzer, and we wouldn't find out about it until this had happened quite a few times. And in addition to that, there were no defined centrally managed point-of-care services for most of the devices. The iStats were the only ones we had connected, and they were the only ones we could really manage centrally at all. So what do we do about this? Okay, so we changed. We got a new middleware system, so we put all our analyzers online to a high-quality middleware system. From there, the results are passed to our LIS. Our LIS is also statewide, like our pathology service, so once a result hits the LIS, it can be seen anywhere in the state. Our QC is now tracked statewide in our middleware, and to some extent still in our LIS, so that's largely historical and is being phased out now. And our quality assurance is still managed locally because it needs to be, because that's where the testing is done, but we can track it statewide as well. These were all quite significant changes. Our training is now by online training modules. These are available now statewide 24/7 as against when there was a lab available to go out there or when there was a key operator available. Many of those remote sites are staffed by agency staff, and our laboratories used to say that they would go out in 3 months' time and there would not be a single person there that they had seen last time. So we've neatly sidestepped that problem now. And what's more, an online module is consistent. It doesn't matter how many times it's seen or how many people have seen it, they always get the same content and the same message. We now have a central statewide quality management document control system. No more local variations and shortcuts. There is a standardized documentation system that has to be followed. And it's tied into our online training module. It's the same material all the way through the system. We also set up a central email and website exclusively for point of care. So this means now that all issues can come to one point, which means that we can give consistent feedback to all our users and get a much better idea of what's going on out there in the state. And we set up a single dedicated statewide management team. So I got a couple of people to help me, a second scientist and an administration officer. So we could actually divvy up some jobs and actually start making some progress. So I recommend, if you want to manage a big network, you need to have a dedicated team. So how do we do this now? So as I said, we have 35 laboratories. They can verify instruments near to where they're going to be used. They can verify an instrument that's performing to manufacturer's spec after transportation, and they can install it for us. We don't have to race out and do every place in the state ourselves. Any of the complex validations and the initial setups are done by us down here at Central, but once we've done them once, we're happy to pass that on to our labs to continue to do for additional analyzers. These labs are also our support bases throughout the state, so now our clinicians only have to perform their EQC on their analyzers. That's easy to do, and it's a consistent check, and it can be done reliably, and we can trace it. And instead, our laboratories perform bulk QC on single cartridge lots. They'll buy a pallet of one cartridge lot, they'll QC it, and then it will be distributed to our smaller centres in temperature-controlled environments, so transport simply becomes an extension of the manufacturer's recommended storage, and it doesn't need to be rechecked at the site. So we've eliminated the variable of bad QC. So what does this mean for us? Well, now we can look at our screen every day and we can see our results coming through. You can see on the screen there at the top there's some A1C results come through from from one of our DCA analyzers. Underneath there, some iStat results. So there they are in our middleware. And then seconds later, there they are in our LIS, in part of the patient's permanent record, which, as you will recall, I've said is available all over the state. So we've now managed our patient results. So we go on to the next screen. As I said, QC was a problem. Well, there's all my QC for my iStats for one chemistry, urea, for 6 months for one lot number and one level. All in the one spot. I can see how all our lab analyzers, who you'll remember are doing all our QC, are performing side by side. And what's more, I can quantify that. I can drill down, and now I'm looking at just the one in the laboratory here at Central that looks after Royal Brisbane cartridge distribution. And I can drill down further, and I can look and see that that was done by Jim on that time and date, and we can add any comments that we deem necessary if there was an issue, if it was out of specification or something, and what action was taken. So now I'm managing my QC. And as I said, what was being done at the analyzers at the remote sites was always an issue, so now the clinicians only have to do the EQC, which you can see they're doing there very well. Only a couple of spots missed there, and our instruments are set up to swing to the internal QC if they don't run the external EQC. One dot down the bottom there was a cleaning cartridge, which is run in EQC mode, so I know that they're also cleaning their analyzers when they should be as well. So now I'm managing the QC at my point of care, and I can prove it. Whereas in the old system, that's my QC point from the analyzer at Central. I can only see my analyzer at Central for that one episode. To look at all my laboratories simultaneously, I would have to flick in and out of 35 different graphs, which just is terribly difficult for 8 or 10 chemistries. So you can imagine the huge steps that we now, the huge improvements that we now have being able to look at it all on the one point. Not only that, this is probably a bit difficult to see, but this is just an iStat screen to which the error codes come across. I can see if cartridges are being underfilled or overfilled, if there's issues with error codes relating to temperature or other things. In fact, I can see how my analyzer is being used. So now that issue of people doing the wrong thing, I can actually see it. I can ring that site and find out what's going on. We mentioned maintenance being difficult to monitor. I'll get onto that in a minute. This isn't just obviously for iStats. Here's some QC on a A1C analyzer on the DCA Vantage. Exact same principle as it was for the iStat, and just as many useful tools for looking at things and quantifying things. So this is the DCA on the same screen as the iStat. Not only can I see issues with analysis, but the maintenance that was so hard to track before when it was on paper is right there on the screen. I can see that it's been done, and I can see if it hasn't been done. And I'll be on the phone if it hasn't been done to find out why not. So once again, there it is, permanently recorded and easy to see. And what's more is we can pull the statistics out. We send a monthly report out to all our sites describing how many tests they've done. We've color-coded it to say green is good, orange is wary, and red is bad, so that they can actually see how they're going on that big curve of errors before. So I'm proud to say that we've reduced our statewide error rate from about 15 to 20% down to less than 5% by being able to track and monitor all these things. So that goes out monthly, and we also drive it down a little bit further to individual operators, so we can send that out to them and say these operators probably need retraining, these operators are doing great, give them a prize or something for doing a great job. So once again, we're managing our operators at the source, and we're managing our consumables in the first one. Because these people know now how much they use every month, they can intelligently compile those orders that they send out to the remote areas so waste is minimised. In other words, they know they use this many, they can send them that many plus a little allowance for wastage or for an extra margin in case they had a car accident or something and they needed extra cartridges. So we greatly minimise wastage by using these reports. So moving on, here's our happy little team. Vince on the left, me, the big hirsute guy in the middle, and Lorna on the right, standing in front of our map of our state. in our HQ. And what do we like about Poxcelerator, our middleware? Well, as I've shown you, it allows us a great degree of control over our network. You might say it really makes our network possible. I mean, how else would you control such a massive area and so many analyzers without something that brings it all together like that? We find it to be a quality system that offers flexibility and an impressive array of compatible analyzers. We are in the process of adding a few more analyzers even as we speak that I hadn't put on the slides here. It's a system that's under active development, and we've found the developers very responsible and very responsive about adding new features. We want to pull out a new statistic to enhance our management. We found them very helpful to say, yes, we can do that for you. And I think it helps them too, because it gives them ideas about new ways that their software can be used. We find it generally to be very stable and reliable. We don't have many problems with lockups or crashes. It's really quite good. So, just to summarise what I've spoken about, a good middleware is more than just a conduit from your analyzer to your LIS. It's not just an adapter plug. It's an active part of your management process if you want it to be. There's a lot of stuff in there that you can use it for. Certainly, our middleware system is essential to manage our network. We manage our instruments and cartridges with it, we manage our test operators with it, and we manage our QC and our QA with it. And Poxcelerator enables us to keep a wide-ranging network that remains largely ISO 15189 compliant. And thank you for listening, and I'll turn you over to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to Cameron there for a really, really informative and enjoyable presentation. So now it's time to move on to the final part of today's webinar, the question and answer session. So we've had lots of interesting questions come in from some of our attendees. So the first question is, with so many operators spread out across the entire state, how do you properly maintain your operator training?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me up there?
Perfect.
Yes, excellent.
Yes,
very good. Okay, how do we maintain our operator training? Well, certainly in times gone past, it was done by face-to-face training, but our network outgrew that method of doing things over time, and we moved to an online system so that the training could be available 24/7, and we had a traceable record of people's training and a record of when they were due for training and when they were due for renewals.
Great. So question number 2, where do you see point-of-care middleware taking you in the future?
Well, that's a really an open-ended question. Every time we get a new analyzer to look at, or someone comes to me and poses a new problem or a niche application for point of care, I think, how can we use our middleware to manage this? So I think it will be driven by the market and by demand from clinicians, and I guess even a little bit further down the road from patients.
Brilliant. So our next question is, do you utilize some type of learning management system today to manage your device operators?
Yes, we do. As I said, we have an online system. It's a SCORM-compatible system. It's actually piggybacked off Queensland Health's main learning system, where they keep most of their compulsory competencies. We are just another branch on that tree with our own modules in there, and that's accessible through any Queensland Health computer at any time.
Fantastic. So another one of our attendees has asked, what is the proper way to do QC for biochemistry and haematology, and how do you maintain registers?
Yes, I guess that's more of a general question. Certainly QC, the way we do it in Pathology Queensland is the larger laboratories that run 24/7. All the chemistries and haematology parameters get 2 or 3 levels of QC every shift, and then that's reviewed by the lab manager the next day. Obviously, any immediately obvious problems have to be fixed by the person on the shift. Anything that's minor or doesn't affect testing at the time can be put off and will be looked at by the quality coordinator and or the lab manager the next day.
Fantastic. So another question that we've had is, what are the main benefits that you've achieved by implementing middleware?
The main benefit is that we actually can run that network. You saw our group, there's 3 of us. It would be impossible without it, or if not impossible, if we were still running with the paper-based system we were back until 2014, it would be a much lower quality standard of testing.
Fabulous. So another one of our attendees is wondering whether you can actually quantify the impact on the reduction in time that you've realised with your middleware.
Yes, we could. I think I gave out an estimate at another meeting about, I'm pretty sure it actually gave us the equivalent of 1 full-time equivalent staff member every day across the state, simply by being able to manage things centrally and having everything at the one place and at your fingertips.
Brilliant. So our next question is another question about QC. One of our attendees was wondering whether you could describe how QC is reviewed across such a large area and between multiple systems and serial numbers.
Yes. Well, that's one of the benefits of our middleware. Once again, I don't think we could manage it if we were trying to run a manual system, particularly analyzers like iStat analyzers that have lots of different cartridge lots, lots of different QC lots. The system largely tracks that automatically for us. The other thing is that because we have our laboratories, as I said in the webinar, QCing our stuff in bulk, we don't have a huge variety of lots running around at any one time. And so by looking in our middleware, we can see what the results are for each group and between groups. And if there's any trending between groups, obviously we'll be looking to see if that's linked to a common lot number. Fortunately, it's not something that happens too much these days, because I think most manufacturers supply fairly high-quality materials now.
Brilliant. So we've had another interesting question about training and competencies. One of our attendees was wondering how training and competency is signed off in this service, because ISO requires an observational element.
It does indeed. We do that by running basically a 2-tiered network. All of our laboratories and the laboratory sites, which are the major hospitals, are done strictly in accordance with the ISO. So basically they'll do the same training program as everybody else, but they will be signed off by their supervisors or their superiors, and we will basically get an emailed PDF of their training certificate to that effect, which we will attach to their file. The more remote areas are a little bit harder to do. They're not all accredited sites, so we can be a little bit more flexible with them. What we do there is, when people are bought into the system, we need them to send us their certificate the first time, their online training certificate that the system produces for them, and that will be signed off by their supervisors to say that they have seen that not only have they done the course, but they can satisfactorily do the tests. And once again, we'll append that to their record, and then as they come up for their renewals, we'll just, in between times, we are managing by exception. So we're looking at their level of performance. Are they having analysis issues? Are they having trouble with quality control? And that's part of their ongoing management, which will reflect what happens when they come up for renewal.
Brilliant. So we've got another question about training here, actually, and somebody is wondering whether trainees have the opportunity to perform hands-on training during the initial training process.
Yes, they do. If we can possibly manage it, when an analyzer is like an analyzer which is new to a site, is set up for the first time, we'll get one of our laboratory sites to go out there and actually set up the analyzer with them and perform face-to-face training on all the people, and then we'll actually ask them to either, and we can do this one of two ways, they can either do the online training before the lab goes out so that they're aware the face-to-face will make more sense, or depending on the timing, they might do it after the lab have gone back as a form of refresher. But we're using the lab as the people who fill the gaps and the online training as a standardised set of training that they will at least all be at the same basic standard. So yes, we do, wherever possible.
Great. So our next question is, have you established the measurement uncertainty of each point of care test, and how do you communicate this to your users?
Yes, we have, because that's part of our ISO as well. It was rather hard to do with point of care, and so what I ended up doing is somewhat differently to the laboratory process. We used our pooled QC for our cartridge-based analyzers across the whole state, so probably our measurement of uncertainty was a more reliable indicator, because we've gone with multiple operators, multiple analyzers, multiple cartridge lots, but all the same QC lot. And we worked out our MUs on that basis, and that is available on our website for anyone who wants it. We don't report it on the actual reports routinely, but it certainly is available and it's there for the assessors when they come through.
Great. So we've had even more questions come through. Next one is, why has ISO 22870 2016 not been used for point-of-care testing?
Yes, that's a very good question, actually. In Australia, point-of-care has been lumped in with laboratory testing, and all the laboratories are currently covered under 15189. This does cause issues, and in fact, it's giving cause to perhaps a rethink of that in the next year or two, that perhaps we should split point-of-care off, because certainly there are times when trying to use 15189 for the point-of-care around PEG, it just does not fit in the laboratory square hole very well. So that is a good question, and that is certainly something that's under review.
Brilliant. So last few questions now. This attendee is wondering whether, if the point-of-care analyzer is run in the lab, do you need to perform QC as a lab or point-of-care?
If it's run in the lab, it has to follow the lab standards. That's an easy one.
Brilliant. So a couple more questions left. One of our attendees was also wondering whether you accept the manufacturer's QC ranges, because they've previously been pulled up on their ranges not being tightened further based on the performance of the equipment.
Yes, that's another good question. We've done a bit of both there. In the case of the blood gas analyzers, which generally are not in my scope, clinical chemistry look after those as a rule, because they're in a position to buy a single lot number of QC for 12 months, they actually have tightened up their QC limits. For my ISTAT analyzers and the others, because I'm relying on the automated QC process, the download of the ranges from the manufacturer's website and sending that through the system, I'm looking at that more as rather than traditional QC, because it's not, as a measure of the compliance of a certain lot of cartridges for suitability for use, rather than QC in the traditional sense. So basically, I'm just saying, as long as they perform within, say, 2.5 SDs of the mean, they're probably suitable to use. And that's how we neatly sidestep that little issue.
Fantastic. So another question. Do you have a point-of-care testing management group and or governance committee which could critically review the service and potentially agree to the extension of testing and allow implementation of new testing?
We do. We actually have a couple of groups because point of care is a multidisciplinary type of operation. We've got our own point of care working group that looks at point of care as an overview, be it chemistry tests, hematology tests, micro tests, and we basically formulate broad guidelines on that basis, and then we go to the individual disciplines. So we'll go to hematology for a hematology test or chemistry for a chemistry test to get their additional input before we'll implement a new test or a new instrument. So we kind of work in tandem with our disciplines that way. That keeps everybody happy, and it also ensures that we've always got specialist advice on any tests that we want to introduce or perhaps even remove.
Brilliant. So we've had some more questions come in. This one is asking about how you approach using the manufacturer's QC material rather than third-party QC, which ISO states should be used if available, because they appreciate it's difficult with onboard QC within the cartridge, such as blood gases.
Yes, another good one, because we've run across these issues as well. There have been times when we've simply had to make the point to accreditation agencies and accreditation officials that sometimes third-party material simply does not work with a point-of-care analyzer. Where I've had some argument about that point, I've pointed out that another part of the ISO also says that the manufacturer's recommendations should always be followed. So you can approach that point of view from two different angles.
Fantastic. So I think we've got time for one more question. One of our attendees was wondering whether you have a lab director who takes full responsibility of all of the results that you generate from point-of-care testing. And if not, how is this level of clinical oversight achieved?
Sure. Yes, we do. Because we are one pathology service across the whole state, we do have one lab director who, in theory, covers all the laboratories, including the associated point-of-care testing. So ultimately, they are responsible, but we also have our individual discipline directors for clinical chemistry, hematology, microbiology, etc., who also have oversight over those particular specialties. So in a similar thing to what we do with our scientific side of management, the clinical side of management will obviously initially go to one of the discipline directors. Micro problem goes to micro, hematology to hematology, etc. If necessary, then it's escalated up to the overall director for a final decision, and that's how we manage the clinical decision making.
Fantastic. So I think, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today in terms of questions. I just want to take this time to say thank you so much to Cameron for today's really, really informative presentation and discussion there. There were lots of really fantastic questions. And thank you to everyone joining us online for your really interesting input there. I hope that you found this a truly worthwhile session. And if we didn't manage to answer your questions, then please feel free to email me at frankie.macdonald@selectscience.net. I can follow up with your questions personally. And again, if you'd like to listen to today's webinar or even invite a friend to listen, then we'll be emailing the on-demand link to you in a few days' time. Don't forget to stay tuned after the broadcast stops for access to your continuing education credits. You'll be automatically redirected as soon as the broadcast stops. And that's it. Thank you and goodbye.